Hey, what's good everyone? Welcome to Ice Rink Diaries, Local Iceman here. And today I'm going to do a quick episode about how much water do you put in your Zamboni, your ice making water as well as your wash water. Now the reason why I mentioned this, years ago I went to a training seminar and he was pretty adamant about you only put enough water in your tank that you need. You don't want to fill up all the way and use half a tank. You're just killing the hot water, and I get the point about the hot water. You don't really want to fill your tank up and let your hot water get cold. But I can say, unless it's minus 10 degrees in your Zamboni room, hot water stays pretty hot. I mean, we've had the hot water accidentally filled up at night before, and you come in and you dip your hand in there, it's still pretty warm. And that's overnight. But I don't see the harm in filling your tank up all the way. However, that being said, I don't really fill my tank up all the way. So when I filled my Zamboni, traditionally in the past, I'd filled up right up to the overfill line, sometimes letting it overflow. And that's how I was taught, and that's how I did things. Then again, I went to a training seminar where they said you only put as much water in the tank that you need. I found that was kind of odd, especially the reasoning behind it, the hot water. It's a good point, but I don't think it's a valid point, because your hot water stays pretty hot from 1 hour to the next. Now, if you're going to fill it up overnight, that's one thing, but from 1 hour to the next, when ice get to the next, your hot water is not going to cool down that much, that significantly. That being said, there's a few caveats, so to say. Talking about hot water, and it's one of the first caveats, it's a good transition. Now, hot water only matters in the sense is that if you want clear ice. The hotter the water, the clearer the ice. I believe hot water is the best for bonding one layer to the next, but I think you could achieve that with 110 degree water. But as far as say 130 degree water, 140 degree water, the hotter the water, the clearer the ice. And I'll throw a little chart here that I have in the training book here I got from the STAR training. Now I have a chart here that says that anything over 110 degrees, you have 10 parts per million, but as you get to 120 and 130, it goes down to like 8 and 6. So, and hot water only really matters if, let's say you have an arena atmosphere where you have logos in the ice, and games are going to be on TV. You want your lines to be crisp and clean. You want your logos to be popping so people can see your sponsors. So that's where the hot water and ice clarity comes in. So in that case, you want to make sure your water is at least 130 degrees or more, because that contains the least amount of dissolvable minerals or whatever. But anything over 130 degrees, you're not going to really get, it's a point of diminished return, I guess. You're not going to get any more benefits out of it. But once you get down below 110 degrees, then your water becomes a little bit less clear. So it doesn't really matter in a sense if you're just a recreational rink like us. Having 130 degree water may not be as important versus 120 degree or 110 degree. And there's no harm filling your ice resurfacer up an hour before and having your hot water going from 130 down to 115. But if you're a rink where the clarity of the logos matters because the game's being broadcast on TV, I guess maybe you want to wait right beforehand to fill your water up. But then again, I think that you probably want to have your water filled up just to be prepared. And a question I get from new drivers regarding the hot water is, when is a good time to fill the hot water up? Like, should I fill it up before my cut or after my cut? Now, that's a good question. Like, how I see it, if you're doing cuts back to back to back, like every hour and 15 minutes, it's okay to fill up your Zamboni right after you get done with the ice. Also, if you have multiple rinks where you're going from one surface to the next, it's probably a good idea to fill your Zamboni up. Now here at night and weekends when you get busy doing other tasks like cleaning, sweeping, moving tables, sometimes it's a good idea to fill your machine up so you have it ready to go so you don't forget about it. I don't think the water is going to cool off in an hour and a half between cuts. But overnight when a guy gets done, even if it's at 1 o'clock in the morning or our next ice cut's at 7 in the morning, we don't fill the machine up overnight. I think there you probably lose some hot water. Unless the goal is to use cold water in the morning. Some rinks pre-fill their machine at night so they could do a cold flood in the morning. It reduces the load onto the ice. That's perfectly acceptable. But if you're busy throughout the night, it's a good idea to pre-fill your machine. That way you don't forget about it. You don't get caught doing something and have to run over here and say, oh my God, my machine's not full. If I do get in a pinch and if I get to fill my machine, if I have a half a tank, I'll go out there with a half a tank, no questions asked, because that's what I have to do. I just want to add, if the water you're putting into your machine is not very hot, either because of increased demand or an ineffective hot water heating system, then it's best not to fill your machine too far in advance. For example, if you are pre-filling your machine with 100 to 110 degree water, by the time you have to run your machine, the water will have cooled down to the point where it's lost some of its effectiveness. So what you want to do is wait for your water to heat up and stay hot by filling your ice making tank right before the next ice resurface to ensure the hottest water possible. However, if your water is in the $1.20 to $1.30 range like ours, the pre-filling machine won't make a huge difference, because if the water does cool down some, it's still plenty hot to make a silky smooth sheet of ice. Again, I said there's a couple caveats. So another caveat is, yeah, you want to fill your water up as much as possible to keep as much water and pressure in there. But from what I learned, and again, you learn from mistakes, is that when I did fill it up all the way, or just below the overfill, and I had to back onto the ice to close a player bench door, or say 2 player bench doors, and you stop your machine, this water sloshes around and it goes up over, and if you sit the machine there on the ice for a few minutes, water just drips out of the overflow hose onto the ice, melting not a big hole, it depends how long you sit there, but it can melt a pretty good hole in the ice. And if you stop and talk to a referee or you chat with someone a little bit too long, that water just sits there and drips and drips and drips. If you let it go long enough, it can make a decent sized hole in your ice. So what I've been doing is basically where I'm at right now with the water, is that I fill the water up to about this point right here. That's, you know, a good 7/8 of a tank. That's plenty of water for most of the cuts you do. I tell you what, it's really hard. You gotta try to run out of water. I mean, if you're dumping a whole tank of water and you worry about running out, that's something, you know, you're laying way too much water. I also follow the same philosophy with my wash water. I put a line right here that tells me right here is if you fill it past this point, I don't know if you can barely see it, but the water line's right about here. I know the light's kind of bad, but I think you can see it. If you fill it to right here, that's the overflow. So I always stop it right about here. You don't need to fill your wash water up all the way. Again, it overflows. And even though this water's cold, it's not going to make a huge difference on your ice. It just makes a mess on the floor. And technically what I do with my wash water, I know you're supposed to fill it with cold water, but what I do, I top my wash water off every time with hot water, because to get to our cold water is a little bit difficult, and hot water is heated through the refrigeration system here, so it's not paying extra for the hot water, so to say. Pulling hot water through the system actually makes the refrigeration system a little more efficient. But nevertheless, if I have to fill my tank up all the way, I would use cold water. But if I'm topping the tank off like a quarter of a way, I'm just going to fill up with hot water. Another caveat to consider, now correct me if I'm wrong, the more water you have in your tank, the more head pressure you have, so to say, the more pressure coming out your spreader bar. Now I've looked at that spreader bar and I've noticed from when your tank is full, from when it's empty, it's not coming out as fast. So theoretically, when your tank is full, you're pushing out a lot more water than when it's empty. So if you're only laying a half a tank of water, that's not going to affect things very much. But if you're only filling it up, you know, 3/4 of the way, half a tank, as much as you need, and you go out on the ice and dump some water, what's going to happen is that towards the end of your cut, you're going to be laying less and less water. And that's one thing why you should flip your patterns around for that reason. So to prevent that from happening, what you want to do is you fill your tank up at, say, at least 3/4, so as you drain it, you still have that head pressure there. So for example, if I turn the water on, it's full, so it's coming out really good. But if you get down to a quarter tank, eighth of the tank, I mean, the water's going to be coming out a little bit less aggressive. So the whole idea is that you want to fill enough water in that tank to keep the pressure high enough so that the water is being laid consistently from the beginning of your cut to the end of your cut. And I always thought that having a full tank of water is the best way to get the most pressure and the most consistent pressure and flow out your spreader bar. And another caveat, this is what I've heard, I forgot where I heard this from. I don't think it was from the training, I think it was just talk around the shop, that the more water you have in your tank, the more down pressure you have. And as you're laying water, you're taking up snow. So I'm pretty certain that the water is heavier than the snow because the snow is expanded and it takes in air, and as water freezes, it expands. But nevertheless, as you're laying water, you're losing weight. And although you're gaining a little bit of weight when you're taking on snow, it's not as much as the water. As you're losing weight, you're losing down pressure on the back. Now, one thing, as I was thinking about this, the snow, most of the snow's weight is in front of the machine, and most of the water's weight is kind of middle towards the back. So I could see having the weight for the water, for the down pressure for the conditioner would make, you could argue for it, it makes somewhat sense. But the snow in your tank, I think, would put more down pressure on the front of the machine, which would be good for traction as well as the rear machine. So I guess, you know, Leave comments below if I'm driving off a cliff with this one. But it seems to make a little sense that if you want to keep your tank a little bit fuller, because if you're halfway through your cut and your tank's pretty empty and you have enough water to technically get your cut done, but you're losing a lot of down pressure on the tires as well as on the blade itself. Now I don't think it's significant amount to affect the quality of the cut. However, it could affect somewhat the driving, but it's just something to consider, that the more water you have in your tank, the more down pressure there is on the Zamboni. So I know this gauge right here, if you have one, full doesn't necessarily mean full. Full on the gauge right there, is right about where that tank level is right now. So if you fill up all the way to the overflow level, you're actually getting more than a technically full tank. And that's just my thoughts and opinions about how much water you should put in your ice making tank. It's not rocket science or anything, it's just a little advice from your local iceman. And this is a nice introduction video into ice making as far as using your water on the ice and adjusting your water on and off on the ice. I also didn't touch on any of the additives or devices you could use in lieu of hot water. I think I'll save that for another video. And although I talked about hot water and ice clarity, I haven't touched upon hot water and ice making. And now I heard that hot water is supposed to freeze faster, but I don't think that's true. I think I've seen some videos and talked to a chemist who happened to come through here and said that's not true. And the video I saw actually was kind of weird because it kind of started saying it was true, but at the end it says it's not true, where it seems like hot water freezes faster, but at the end it really doesn't. But I do think hot water bonds better with the next layer. So as you lay in a new sheet of water, the hot water kind of melts the surface of the ice and it kind of forms and meshes a new layer. So I believe that's significant and a good reason to use hot water. All right, thanks for watching everyone. I hope you learned something. And like the local iceman says, stay cool.